Let's go to our next guest on the program. Joining me live now is Greens MP Adam Bandt from our Melbourne studio. Adam Bandt, thanks very much for your time today. Let's start on the raids that have been capturing plenty of attention. Now, the AFP were very clear here about the process and the lack of government intervention. Referrals were from the departments. From that time, they were in charge, the Australian Federal Police, that is, in charge of investigating this, getting the warrants and executing them. Do you accept that version of events from the AFP?
Well, I don't think it matters, to be frank, because I think what matters is the behaviour of the government and the powers that these organisations have. As far as the behaviour of the government is concerned, the government obviously had a role in allowing its departments that are under its control to refer matters to the AFP. And I think there has to be some ministerial responsibility here, and I do think we are entitled to know what the government knew and when, whether there are policies in place that say it's okay for any particular government department to refer matters to the AFP if they're concerned, whether the departments were encouraged. There's still a lot of unanswered questions on the government side there. But the second point is about the powers that these organisations have got. Because
I want to go to the powers in a moment, but just on the process here, we will talk about the powers, but you say that there needs to be some sort of process around the minister and referrals from departments. We know the story last year on possible increased powers by departments were leaked emails within the department. So if a department head there, say of Defence, wants to refer something, is the minister supposed to say, no, don't refer that? Shouldn't they be autonomous in that situation?
Well, we need a full and open inquiry into how this government, especially now that they've been re-elected for another 3 years, how they operate with respect to their departments and with respect to the police and with respect to journalists. And that's why we're going to push for a Senate inquiry into freedom of the press when Parliament resumes, because I think there is a big question to be asked. When you've got information that, yes, it might be embarrassing to a department or it might be embarrassing to a government if it comes out, but if we're talking about information which is in the public interest, as I think undoubtedly was the case in these instances, where we're talking about increased surveillance of the Australian population or plans for that in one instance, and in another instance how our armed forces were acting in our name overseas. Now, in those instances, you have to ask, is the government saying, look, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter what the public interest is, we are quite happy for departments, we'll give you a nod and a wink to start referring matters. Is that what's going on? That's what we need answers to, because that is how these kind of activities get out of control. That is how you start becoming one of the world's most secretive democracies.
So as to what should happen in terms of the powers of these authorities and prosecution of this, are we talking about a catch-all public interest test for journalists and something similar, perhaps a provision within the Public Information Disclosure Act for whistleblowers, so that there still needs to be a line? You can't just spill out anything you want from a department and something that's labelled secret. There needs to be a test for that. Is that how you imagine it working?
We've been arguing very, very strongly over a number of years now for greater public interest exemptions and for greater protections for whistleblowers, and for a very clear and spelled out understanding about the proper role of journalism when it comes to protecting and reporting on the public interest, because that is how this information will get out, is if journalists feel free when there's information that's in the public interest, when it's brought to them by a whistleblower, that's how they'll feel free to report it. And I think the public would look at these instances and think, well, given the nature of the information that's been released, what possible reason could there be for putting a journalist or a whistleblower in legal doubt in the first place, let alone raiding them, as has been the case here, or potentially even prosecuting those people? So we've been pushing that for quite some time. Now, it seems to be the case from what people closer to it have said so far, is that these warrants have been executed using old powers. But those tests that I just enunciated were tests that we sought to have the Parliament apply when it's come over the last couple of years to the expansion of powers of Peter Dutton's agencies. And we've been virtually friendless in Parliament. And we've said very, very clearly that if we start giving Peter Dutton and his agencies more power, that not only gives them more power, but it gives them more licence to do this. And that sends a chilling effect. That has a chilling effect for Australian journalism and for democracy as a whole. Now, I am glad that the opposition is now starting to show a bit of spine on this issue. But I hope that that means that the next time that the government just scribbles national security in crayon on the front of a piece of legislation and brings it in front of the parliament, that the opposition will join with us in perhaps opposing it next time, because we're seeing where it leads.
OK. Do we need to be a little bit circumspect about what we don't know? We heard from the AFP there, Neil Gagan, that in at least one case, sensitive information has been revealed, not published, but revealed, so leaked in some way that should never have got out. We don't know what that is. Should we take that again at face value?
Well, again, it suggests to me that by and large, independent journalism in Australia is working and it needs to be defended. Now, if you take that at face value, and we're going to find out all of the facts a bit more, if you take that at face value, what that suggests is that the ABC was in receipt of some information, decided that some of it shouldn't be released because it wasn't necessarily germane to the story, but other parts of it should. And that has been responsibly then reported. Now,
but also,
if that's right, let's take that at face value.
I'll keep it hypothetical because I don't want to talk about things I can't ascertain, but it also suggests that the person getting the information, that they've done that and they've taken information that's not in the public interest, that's sensitive. So if we're talking about just the whistleblower themselves, that they should face consequences.
Well, again, look, let's have a full and frank inquiry into that to work out where the line should be drawn. But what is clear at the moment is that the very fact that some of this can take place and people can be asking questions about legitimate journalism and what on the other side of the line would be seen to be legitimate whistleblowing should send a shiver down people's spine. Now, look,
all right.
Peter Dutton is the kind of person I think who would be quite comfortable running a police state. Perhaps now it is time to take stock and say maybe the trend of giving him and his agencies enormous amount of powers without being clear that there are proper protections enshrined in law for journalists and whistleblowers, perhaps that era needs to come to an end.
All right, for the record, he has said no knowledge at all of the raids. That was backed up by the AFP, and that he supports press freedom. I want to ask you about emissions data out today. Eventually, Adam Bandt, and the Minister said it was simply because he was only sworn in last Wednesday. It does point to increasing emissions again, but if you strip out the LNP export industry, which obviously is an activity we undertake here, the emissions are going down. Is that a fair enough point to make?
Pollution's going up and up and up, and one of the things that is driving pollution going up is the obsession with getting every last bit of coal and gas out of the ground or out from underneath our oceans, and then extracting it and then either burning it here or exporting it. And whether we burn it here or export it, it adds not only to the world's emissions, but what we found out today is that it's adding to Australia's emissions. And the idea that somehow we can just do it and ship it off to someone else and it doesn't have an impact is wrong.
But isn't gas right now a good transition fuel?
No, it's
because
not.
it has fewer emissions than coal.
What we're learning today is that gas, the extraction of gas and liquefying it and putting it in those big ships and sending it off overseas, that is in large part what is driving up our pollution. And the electricity sector is doing a good job.
But what if it's being shipped overseas to replace coal in that global sense? Isn't that a good thing?
No, well, let's start exporting sunlight instead. Let's start exporting hydrogen by using renewable energy to convert water into hydrogen. And let's pop that in those big tankers and send it overseas. And then we'll not only be reducing Australia's emissions, but we'll be reducing the world's emissions. That's not going to happen
on a scale right now, is it? That's why gas is spoken about as a transition fuel.
Look, we are facing... we should stop talking about climate change. We're facing a climate emergency. We are facing climate breakdown. The retired Admiral, former head of the Australian Defence Force, Chris Barry, has this week endorsed a report that says by 2050 we could be looking at civilisational collapse. That is, 1 billion people on the move because their homelands are no longer sustainable places to live in. So when my daughter is my age, in 2050, we could be looking at having large parts of the planet basically being uninhabitable. Now, we need to drastically get off fossil fuels stop digging up coal, stop extracting gas, and get onto renewables. The time for this kind of suggestion of maybe we can have this kind of fossil fuel instead of that one, that is over. That might have been a good debate 20 or 30 years ago, but that time is over. All we can do now is get drastically to zero emissions.
Adam Bandt, thanks for your time today.
Thanks very much.